And we're live.
Cool.
So, all right. So we have some guests on today. So welcome. So welcome back, Ryan, as
Hello.
adult supervision. And then we have Javier on today.
Hello.
Welcome. So you're going to be showing us some cool demos. This is part of our ASP.NET Core 2.1 series that we're doing as every 10 a.m. So every morning for us session of the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. We're doing these, having someone from the team come in and show off a preview of something you're working on for ASP.NET Core 2.1, which is super exciting. So that's fun. And you're going to be showing us Razor.
Yeah, so I'm going to be showing Razor and class libraries.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start by, I'm going to share community links for the week, and then we'll jump right in.
All right.
Here we go. Sharing my screen. Awesome. Okay, so starting off with a post from Michelle. He's showing dependency injection or dependency lifetime in ASP.NET Core. So some things he goes through in here that are helpful. One is, an explanation of what are the different dependency lifetimes. And kind of some code examples, and then he talks a little bit about differences, request services versus application services. So that's something where he goes into, I think, in a little more depth compared to some previous posts we've looked at here.
Resolving scope service on an application level, don't sleep on that one. That's really useful.
Okay, cool. So anything more you want to say on that?
So the common use that we've seen for this one is like, I want to, in development environment, I want to add some initialization to my database, those kinds of things. DB context is a scope service. So if you ever need to interact with your DB context at the application scope or in your startup code, you'll find yourself reaching for that code right there under that heading.
Cool. Okay. All right, so next we have, this is from Barry Dorans, AKA Blowdart. So he's set up a ASP.NET Core authentication workshop. So he's been teaching workshops. I believe he's somewhere in Europe right now teaching this. So he tweeted this, so I figured it's fair game. So I'm sharing this out. So this is a pretty in-depth workshop that he's got written up here, covering a lot of exciting, as exciting as authentication can be. Here it is. That's cool. And then also speaking of authentication, this is from Scott Allen, and he's writing up using Azure AD. So this is integrating ASP.NET Core with Azure AD groups and assigning rights based on AD groups. So this is kind of cool. Here how he's showing how that's set up in Azure AD and then defined as an authorization policy. Neat stuff.
Cool.
I think we mentioned last week or recently that the NDC videos have gone up, and so these are NDC London videos. So this is an exciting one, as always. Watching Damien and David is fun just in and of itself, but here they're talking about diagnosing issues with ASP.NET Core applications. A lot of pretty in-depth stuff here, so this is worth a watch. Here's a cool one. This is based on a Twitter conversation I saw this past week. So this was Christian Helling and some other people were discussing the server timer header. So this is a new header that's available where you can add server timing information, and then it's visible to in browser tools. So you can go into your whatever, Edge, Chrome, whatever, F12 tools and get information. So Christian was explaining, here's something he kind of knocked up as ASP.NET middleware. Further down in the conversation, Tamaz mentioned he had written up a library to do this in the past. And he's actually written a blog post about this. So this blog post goes back to June of last year, but explains the concept and then links over to his NuGet package, which he's been keeping up to date. So the idea here is standard middleware, tracking diagnostic information and then writing it out using this server timing header. So, and then based on that, you can go into your F12 tools and you can see information. For instance, here he's got, server timing information for SQL Server hit. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, neat way. And this is great to see middleware. This is not a whole lot of lines of code here, and being able to add custom metrics here and then have it kind of flow all the way through. Okay, so this is from Tim. This is a pretty good in-depth post about stripping away cross-cutting concerns. So the idea here is there's a lot of stuff, for instance, if you're running in app service or something where you can go and define things in your, on the cloud. So you can at the environment level, you can say, here's how I'm handling logging and here's how I'm, flip a bunch of switches. If you are not running in the cloud, if you're running on premises, how exactly are you defining that? And so Tim goes through and explains how you can set up a lot of other things. For instance, your, say for container environment or whatever, how you can define your logging, authentication, and those sort of things. Stripping those out of your application code and making them pulled in. So here he's going, there's decent amount of code here. He goes through and explains how he's kind of setting that up and pulling those things in. Way down at the end, he kind of gets back to, what did we achieve and what he's going to continue covering in this series. And, talks about basically the application itself not having knowledge of how, things like logging, port, service discovery, et cetera, are set up. And then you can toggle those things based on your environment. So pretty good in-depth post, worth a read. Yep. Okay, so this is neat from Jonas. I think we may have more information on this one coming up in a future future presentation on this series, or future stand-up. But here he's looking
about it.
Awesome. Okay, so this is maybe an appetizer here. This is action result of type T in ASP.NET Core 2.1. So this allows you to do an action result of, say, type employee. And he pulls out here, and I'm sure you'll go into a lot more detail here, Ryan, but the things that jump out to him here is it's slightly less code, but what's cool to him is that the method signature itself says what the return type is. So something like Swagger can then inspect it and understand, okay, I'm getting an employee back, and return it. Consuming code, including things like generated, Swagger sort of things, can understand what they're receiving. So it's pretty cool. Looking forward to seeing your presentation on that, Ryan. This is a long article from Rick Strahl. So we regularly feature his posts, and he writes tons of great libraries, all kinds of great stuff on ASP.NET in general. Rick is always, Rick presents a pretty good balanced view. He'll say what he likes, what he doesn't like. He's very constructive and helpful. And so here he's kind of going through and explaining, why he's seen .NET Core and ASP.NET Core 2.0 as kind of ready for prime time. Now is a good time to jump in. Now, honestly, those things did ship in August. This is a good kind of roll up though, and kind of in case you missed it, and I guarantee you missed some things compared to all that Rick covers here. This is in the reason I'm mentioning this is in the newest issue of Code Magazine. So this article just came out. So pretty useful. So here, this is from Mike, and Mike Brand. He's written in the past a lot about ASP.NET web pages, and back before it was Razor. So here he's talking about how view models and page model and automapper, et cetera, work in Razor pages. And he talks in here about, that you don't probably want to just treat your page model as kind of you don't want to tie it directly to your models too much. And so he talks about why he sees, for instance, automapper as still useful, and that you would want to use automapper in terms of binding between your view models and your page models. So Good post. Last one here. So we mentioned last week that Jeff Fritz was going to be running this 8-hour live stream on Twitch. This was a workshop. So that happened last Friday. So we had several guests. So Jeff was hosting the whole thing. He included on it, we had Julie Lerman, Shane Boyer, and then myself. And so this was an 8-hour in-depth live stream building an application from scratch. So it's out on Twitch. You can go out and take a look. And it was a lot of fun. I thought one of the most interesting things was we ran this using Visual Studio Live Share. And so as we did this, we were able to do some things where we had 2 people editing code at the same time. So there were some things in here where we actually did a split screen, and we had I was typing on the left side, Jeff was coding on the right side, and we were both kind of pair programming. And so pretty neat to see Visual Studio Live Share working really low latency for sharing and that kind of work. That's it for the community links. So a lot of good stuff. Every week I'm thinking, oh, I'll just share a couple of links, and then I'm ending up having to cut them down because there's just so much going on, so many great things. So.
There's a lot of good stuff there.
Yep. All right. So now it is time to talk about Razor in class libraries.
Okay. So Razor in class libraries, what is it? So you know how you can grab controllers, tag helpers, view components, pretty much everything that you can do in MVC and put in a library, and that just works. We didn't used to have that capability with Razor pages and views. So what we are doing with this new feature is just bringing that into your domain. So the idea is you can grab any view that you have in your app, put in a class library, reference that class library, and that view or page will just work. So I want to start by doing just a demo because I think it's the best way to.
I think you need to share the.
Yeah,
I share your desktop.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a good.
Am I sharing my desktop now?
I don't see it yet. So
Okay.
that's that green icon in the upper left.
Oh
okay. Wow! Now
just got teleported to another dimension.
I love it.
Okay, now I don't know what happened.
Just bring up
you
remote
can just
desktop.
minimize that. Oh yeah.
Remote desktop, and you'll come back to the current dimension.
Okay, wait a second. So now we screen share.
Screen share, and then click on your remote desktop.
Okay, now.
Perfect.
Okay, so you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm gonna start with is I have this very simple Razor project here. So it's just an app with a page in it that is just hello world. And the first thing that we are going to do is move that page into a class library. So if I just go to hello world, it will take forever for some reason. Okay, so just your regular app. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by creating a class library. Well, let me stop debugging first. Project. .NET standard class library, and we're gonna call this app.library. Oh, sorry. We're gonna just call it library 2 because it might have code from a previous version that I was doing. Okay, so we have now our class library. So we're just gonna reference the class library from the main app. we're going to remove this. And we're just going to create a page folder here. Function. Pages. And then we're just going to grab our Hello World page that we have here. And we're just going to copy it into the pages folder. So now this will not work immediately. We need to also copy the view imports that define the tag helpers and the namespace and all that stuff. Let me just close this one. And then we need to add support for actual Razor in class libraries. So in order to do that, there are 3 things that we need to do. The first one is to just create an item group here that says content. This is not the final experience that we'll have. This is just something that we have to do for preview 1. But in preview 2 and onwards, we'll have a Razor SDK that you can just reference, and all these things will work. And then the other 2 things that I need to do is we need to reference MVC. So let me just add the package reference here real quick. So spinet core.mvc, and version is 2.10, preview 1 to 8 to 75. Which is the version that I have installed in my machine.
And it needs to be item group, not import group.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a bad autocomplete there.
Yeah. Item group. And then we need to go here to the properties and say resolve Razor compile toolset, and this will go away.
Should be resolved with a D, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. And this will be Razor SDK. And then the last part is to say Razor compile on build.
So the changes you're making here for the CS proj, these will happen automatically then by the time this ships, or will I need to go in and edit? Okay.
So we plan to have a template for allowing you to do this. And essentially what will happen is the same way you have a Microsoft Net SDK here, there will be a Razor SDK just along with it. And that Razor SDK will bring default values for a bunch of these MS Build things. So you will not have to reference your content, and you will not have to do this resolve Razor compile toolset. And the only thing that I do believe you will have to do is to set Razor to compile on build. By default, I think it compiles on publish. So when you publish your app, you get your views compiled into an additional assembly. But if you want it to happen when it just builds, you need to have set Razor compile on build. So then what we're gonna do to show this is we're just gonna change the text on this, and we're gonna say hello world from class library. Okay, so if we now F5, we should be able to see this. Unless I made a mistake, which it might be the case. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So notice the other thing to mention too about the SDKs is you notice that this is just a regular .NET class library. It's not using the Web SDK. So one piece of strong feedback that we've gotten from people using 2.0 is that they have a lot of cases where they want to use Razor code, but they can't use the Web SDK for one or more reasons. Basically, if you're building a library, the Web SDK is not really a great fit. So we're kind of carving out that space for a separate Razor SDK.
Yeah. Okay, so here it is. Hello world from class library. We didn't have to do anything.
So, okay, so stepping back, the kind of point of this now is you can ship Razor UI as completely as a separate class library. This could be a NuGet package or whatever, right? And
Exactly.
then that's something I can use in my application. I can like I could create a NuGet package that includes maybe some Razor pages to configure something or to set up admin or whatever it is.
Exactly. So for example, I'm going to give you a couple of examples that I can think of. One is, imagine you want to build like a UI for like Swagger or something like that. You could totally ship that in a package with this support. The other thing is one that we actually use, that is identity. All the code that used to be in your template right now, we've put all that stuff into a class library, and now your template is much cleaner from the get-go. And if you want to start using identity, for example, from the empty app, you have a reasonable path to get there without having to like write yourself like 20 or 30 files. That is essentially all the UI for identity. And the reality is that we already, as I said in the beginning, we allow you to do this with other things like controllers, view components, stack helpers. And there's no reason for us not having a story for doing it with views. So this is kind of catching up and putting views in the same level, sort of speak.
Now, how do I do that? So I'm sure there's got to be some way so that I can override that, right? So say a library provides some Razor, but I want to override that in my own application in some way. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So actually, let me show you that. Let's just do something real quick. Let's just stop the app. Let's just do something for fun. Let's just create a partial here. Actually, let me just.
Yeah. So I'll distract you guys while Javier papers over an obvious gap. So one issue that we're aware of right now that will be fixed in the near future is there are currently no item templates for class library projects for Razor stuff. Like there's just no you won't find them. You won't find them in the menus. It's not a significant technical limitation. We just have to do the Visual Studio work to enable the familiar set of item templates for class libraries. So that will be fixed in the future. I wish I could tell you specifically what release it will be in. It will not be fixed in 15.6, which is the current preview VS. But we're aware of that gap and we will fix it. It's kind of painful to work around it for now because you have to copy paste and rename a file or something like that. So we know about it. We didn't miss it. We will fix it. Trust me.
Yeah. Okay, so we just created a partial. So just for the sake of completeness, let's run the app again. But what we are gonna do, spoiler alert, is we're gonna go here and we are gonna create the same partial view on the main application and see how Razor finds that you have the same view on your main app, and it prefers that one over the one that is in the class library. So we just go for Hello World again. So there we are now. Let's just go here. And I'm gonna go on a limb here, and I'm gonna say that probably if I just copy this one and drop it in here, we might not even have to stop the process itself. So we're gonna change the message here and we're gonna say, hello from my app. We're saving everything. And then if I just go to the browser and just refresh, hello from my app. We didn't have to.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah,
very cool.
We didn't have to even stop the app. And what's happening is essentially what I said. Razor will detect that there is a view on the on the same path on the main app, and it will prefer that view over any other view. And this also brings another interesting point, that is all the views that you have in your class libraries can compose with the views that are in your path. So for example, in my class library, I was rendering this partial, and my app didn't have to go and like override the entire page. My app just went and overrode the right partial. So you need to know about when you're building a library, what things you need to be explicit about, what things can be overridden, what partials your app has, and all that stuff. But the idea is this kind of creates a contract between your library and the people that consume it, so that they can do things like what we just did, just drop a partial in their app and override the content.
So this feels natural from an MVC developer point of view, the way it'll look for things and shared, or you know what I mean, the way that views are resolved anyways. This feels like it's just another thing that's been added to that view resolution. Is that kind of the feel that you're going for there?
Yes and no. It's not a new way of finding views, in the sense that when you say, for example, in your Hello World app, go and look for a partial called message, we'll do the same view lookup process that we've done in the past. What happens is when we build a list of the views that the app has, there are obviously in this case going to be where is VS? There are going to be this message view is going to be in the same relative path, if you want to call it that way, in both in the class library and in the main app. And what happens is that MVC, when it builds the application and initializes the apps, it detects that there is a view in the app that has kind of more preference than the one in the path. But the view lookups themselves, like what happens when you say partial, is the same thing that has happened in MVC since the creation of MVC.
Okay.
One thing that I would add to that, John, is the other sort of significant feature add here is that precompiled view content can now be updated in development while the app is running, which is another sort of common request that we've had. So just the act of making precompiled content updatable is what unlocks this. Do you want to show the code? It might be better if we show the code.
The code for what?
The generated code, and then we can explain a little bit about what's actually happening.
Yes. So let me just do here show all files. So what's happening is if we go to the object folder here, debug, net standard, and razor, we see that we have classes that are named the same as our pages and as our views. And what this is the code that Razor generates at compile time when we do build to like create the assembly. So this is the class representation of our message class, and we can see that is just a class that is extends Razor page, and it has an execute async, which is their contract, and we can see here that this is the same message that we show on the library. And
Can I highlight a couple things here? Here? So if you scroll up a few lines, keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Stop there. So line 4 and line 5, can you scroll to the right so we can see the good stuff? Yeah. So this is what we call, the Razor developers, we refer to as the manifest, which is a pretty exciting name for a couple attributes. And what these attributes do is they tell MVC what is the path of this thing. So if you go further to the right, the compiled item, that's the view engine path. So that's the like sort of internal representation of how MVC locates a view. The second thing there, the MVC 1.0.view, is what we call an item type or a document kind. So it says, what kind of thing is this? It's a view. And then the first thing is the .NET type of the compiled code. And then if you go back down to around line 20 or so, I think it's around line 25, actually. Yeah, right there. We have checksums for all the source files that participated in generating this code. So you'll see we have a checksum for the CSHTML. We have a checksum for the view imports. So this is part of the work to make precompiled assets updatable. Is we need to know when we see a precompiled type, not only what path did it come from, what path should we map it to, but what is the sort of like snapshot of the source that we can compare it to. So when we load these views the first time, we not only know if there is existing content with the same view engine path, does it match what we have in the library, which is how overriding works. And then we set up a file watcher to watch those paths on disk, which is how doing things like adding the file at runtime works.
Cool. Okay.
It's all just checksums. They're magic.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It is a lot of magic, but it's actually pretty beautiful, and it unlocks a lot of potential, I think.
So what else do you have for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, John. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Well,
cut you off.
I'm thinking one thing here is that as a use case, as I could see, like a component vendor or a library, like people that are building out cool UI things, being able to ship as a NuGet package, and it pulls everything in a really nice kind of compact way. Like somebody could create a whole thing that would drop in here, hey, this is an admin area, or this is a dashboard, and have it like just kind of magically do things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the nice things about this, there's a set of sort of like recipes that it's kind of on us to document. You have to be thoughtful when you design a library to be shipped that way, but these kinds of things are possible, and we're excited about seeing some people doing them. One of the most obvious things that you can do now, and in fact we do in the identity library, is we can use your app's layout. So a lot of the sort of problems with shipping precompiled view assets are like, how does it compose with your site's look and feel? And we can use existing tools to be able to do that.
Cool.
Yeah, so we can actually show that later. So yeah, this is kind of the Hello World demo, sort of speak. What I want to show next is actually doing this with something relatively simple, but like more real. So I'm gonna switch from this solution to this other solution. So what I have here is just an app from like the .NET template that is using Azure B2C for authentication. And you can see that when you choose Azure B2C, we drop a bunch of stuff in your app. We drop a bunch of pages. We drop a bunch of like extension methods, and we drop a controller. So what we want to do is we want to take this completely out from your app, because it's a piece of functionality that is pretty much self-contained. And we just want to ship it as a class library and have your app consume it. So I think this is a good example that shows something more real than our Hello World app. So essentially, the steps that we follow are the same. Let me just repeat the steps real quick. We go here with a class library. And we call this app using B2C library, and hopefully it will not crash. And then we're just gonna follow the same process of like, let me remove this. Let me go and create the same folder structure. The other thing to mention is the way this work plays really nice, because you don't have to do anything special just because you're building a class library. You can have your same folder structure and everything that you have in your app. You don't have to do anything different, anything fundamentally different. And we're gonna do here account. So now we can just go here and grab these two views. And we can paste them here. Now we can remove the account folder. And now let's just grab the remaining code and copy it into the class library. And then we'll just do the same thing that we did here for our basic app. We'll do resolve razor compile toolset SDK, and we'll do here razor compile on build. And then let me just remove this and do item group, content, include pages, HTML. And finally, let's bring in the NuGet packages that we need. So item group, package reference, include Microsoft Spinet core.mbc, and version is 2.1.0 preview 1 dash 28275.
I'm impressed that you're doing such a good job remembering that build number.
I've done it like several times.
That's the best part of this demo.
As you're typing this in, just to answer Michael's question on the chat, he asks, I assume manual hacking of CS Proj will be automated in production. And so, yeah, that's something that you'd answered before. Yes, this is all just going to be magic, right, as part of the template.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll provide a little bit more detail about that for Michael. So there's a few sort of different things that we're doing here. So step one, there's an SDK for Razor. And if you're not familiar with what that means, it's that attribute at the top of your project that says SDK equals Microsoft.net.SDK or Microsoft Net SDK.web. There's going to be a Microsoft Net SDK.Razor. And you can think of these as expanding circles. So the Razor SDK will bring in the .NET SDK, and the Web SDK will bring in the Razor SDK. So if you're using the Web SDK today, nothing changes for you. If you want to write a class library that includes Razor, that's what the Razor SDK is for. And most of this stuff that you see that are workarounds here will all be sort of subsumed by the SDK. The other thing that I want to point out is we will have a project template for a Razor class library, and we will have support for the item templates for Razor for class libraries that are using the Razor SDK. So there's kind of there's a set of building blocks here, and then there will be sort of an on-Rails experience with templates as well.
Cool.
Yeah. So let me do something real quick here. Let me just grab the namespaces. So yeah. I don't think we need this, but
You shouldn't need it now.
I think it might just be because I didn't have the view imports.
Yeah.
Okay, is it finding it now?
Interesting.
Okay, so I might have missed a step.
Does it build?
Sorry, what do you mean? Yeah, it's not building. It's not finding this thing for some reason. Let's just build the class library. If not, I have.
Because is it in the extension methods that you moved? Does it need to be made public in the?
No, did I forget to add the reference?
Yeah.
Yeah. That explains it.
That would make it a little bit hard.
Yeah. I was like, I've done this several times now. Okay, so now we build. Yeah. And we can just like run the app.
You need to.
Let me just like close it.
So you copy paste your launch settings.
No, the launch settings are correctly set up in here. Why is it complaining? I close IIS Express. Let me just do something real quick in launch settings.json. Let me just change the port in this one to like 5. Okay, so now hopefully we can run the app. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so what we're gonna see now is that we just moved the entire code for auth in maybe like 10 minutes. And we're just gonna be able to log in, log out, and not see any visual difference at all. So I can just hit sign in here.
So this is actually going to Azure to sign you in.
Then. This is literally going to my tenant on Azure to sign you with like B2C.
Okay. So all the Razor kind of front end to all that stuff has been moved over to a class library, and you're showing that all the integration, all the way it's working with all the identity stuff, everything is continuing to work.
Yeah, so exactly. So all the views, all the controllers, all the functionality that you needed to like enable this scenario is now in a class library. And for example, if you hit sign out now, you can see that this view is coming now from the class library. It's not in your app. And I can show you explicitly that. So on your app, you only have the stuff that is relevant for your app. So you have the layout, the login partial, and the login partial, you can think of it as the entry point for your library, sort of speak. So the idea and what we see people doing is building libraries and telling people, hey, if you want to use this, you need to either provide this login partial here, or you need to, or you can create just the login partial in your app to plug in into the functionality in the library. But other than that login partial, everything else doesn't know. Everything else that is in your app doesn't know anything about auth.
So in theory, then that login partial could also be provided by the B2C library, and then you could override it if you want to change it.
Exactly, that's another option.
Wow. Okay. So a few questions from the chat here. Isaac asked, you already set up the Azure B2C like callbacks and things before.
I set up the callback, the tenant, and all that stuff. And if I show you real quick here in my development, I have like the settings for my tenant essentially.
Okay.
So,
all right. Makes sense.
But
one other one that's kind of tangential, but I'll just ask it anyhow. Michael is asking regarding identity, is entity framework dependency going to be separated out, or is that going to continue to be baked in?
I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm gonna tell you a couple of things. Identity doesn't have per se a dependency on entity framework. Entity framework is like is one of the options for implementing the storage level. But there's other people that do table storage, and there are projects out there that I think are listed in the identity repo that show how to do it with other storage mechanisms.
Cool.
So I don't know if that answers the question.
Seemed pretty good to me.
Okay. In fact, now that we are talking about identity, the last thing that I want to show you is how we've actually like used this in our new templates to essentially take out identity completely from your app. So this is the Razor template with individual user accounts. And before you would see pages here, and you would say data, and you would see models and all that stuff. And a lot of them would be models that identity use for like creating their UI. All that stuff, we've done a couple of things. the first thing that we've done is we've moved all the code related to identity to live in an area, in an MVC area. So now it lives on under areas/identity. That way it's on one spot in your app, and you don't have to like, if you want to remove identity, you don't have to be worrying about having to go through all the multiple places in code to just remove it. You can pretty much remove a folder and an identity is gone. The other thing that we've done is we've built a new library, which we can probably show here. That is Microsoft SPNet Core Identity UI, and that contains all the UI that used to be on the templates. Identity, yeah, here. This library contains all the code that used to be on the templates, and it's just now embedded views and class libraries. Sorry, it's just precompiled views, and you can choose to override any view that you want from there in your app by just dropping a file on the same path. So one of the samples that I have for that is in our default template, we'll just tell identity to use the layout from your app. So by default, identity ships with its own layout. That is exactly the same visual layout as the one that you'll find in our templates. But if you want to change the layout, we directly set identity to use the layout from your app. So that way you can do any customization on your layout, and when you run it on identity, we'll pick that up. So
can we pause a moment here? So
yeah,
could you explain to everybody how, like, I see that there's code there that says layout equals pages layout, but could you explain exactly how that works? It might not be super clear.
Yeah, fair enough. So what's happening here for the layout case is identity has a view start page on this path, and areas identity pages view start. Okay, and that view start looks something like this. Okay, so it's telling the layout in identity looks like this, and what that tells identity is go and find a layout CHTML file using the view engine search mechanism. And what happens is identity ships a layout side by side along with this view start. So every page that renders in that folder will pick up the layout from the library. Now, what we do on the templates is we want to change that, and we want to tell identity to use the layout from the app. So instead of just so in order to do that, what we do is we override this view start. And instead of telling identity, hey, go and search for a layout, we tell it your layout is here. It's in pages layout. And if we go to the app, we can see that we have pages layout here. And maybe one thing that we can do to show this is we can just change the title to my custom title. Okay, so if now we run the app,
so the difference there, if anybody's not super familiar with it, if you ever see like a file name with no slashes and no .cshtml, the .cshtml is significant. That's what we call in Razorland a view search, and it's going to use your search paths to find the view by doing basically running an algorithm to try and find a view with a matching file name in a variety of places, which is the most common way to do things. So see, there it is.
Yeah.
If you see a file name that has if you see a view name that has a .cshtml, it's either a relative path from the currently executing view, or it's an absolute path that has a slash or a tilde slash.
Yeah. So yeah, what I've done is essentially I've gone through to an identity view login, for example, and you can see that the layout is the one that our app defines. We can do another thing, that is we can just go here and we can remove that view start page. So if we just remove this, what will happen is identity will fall back to using its own layout.
Okay.
I cannot delete it here, so
Yeah, I don't think the S lets you delete while the app is running, unfortunately.
yeah, that makes me really sad every time.
We had a question from Fanny. He's asking, how does one go about using CSS and JavaScript with an external library?
So that's a great question. Apart from what we've done with Razor and class libraries, we've built a better embedded files provider, which essentially what it does is our current embedded file provider has some limitations. So this new embedded file provider writes a manifest of all the embedded files that you are embedding on a class library. So things like your CSS, your JavaScript, you can just make them embedded resources. And what you do when you are booting up the app is you modify the static file options, and you create a composite file provider and say, hey, use the content root and also use these embedded files. So that's something that people have been doing in the past with some limitations. Now we've taken that same approach, but we are just making it more supported or better supported, if you want to call it that way. And we can show the code if we have time.
I think the other thing that I would say about this is we've made this better, but there might still be more to do.
Yeah.
There might still be more to do. If you think that this is important to you, something you're planning on doing, let us know, because that helps us make decisions about what to work on. We know Javier wrote some code to make this work, but it's not very obvious.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we can show that after we show that this thing.
Okay. So now if I just go to login. Just now the title is the one that the app had instead of the one that we customize, and everything just works. I can probably just maybe try and register. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, I think.
Do you want to show the startup code for the identity UI library?
Yeah.
Just not necessarily the source of it, but just what does the startup code in the app look like?
Yeah.
And then we can talk a little bit more about the file provider thing if there's time. Or we can take some more questions as well.
Yeah. So if we just go to startup here, the startup looks very similar to what you have today. The only thing that we've added is this a default UI line here. So by default, the UI is not plugged in, and when you do a default UI, all the views in that class library get light up, and you can start using the UI. So if you want to at some point say, hey, I want to fully customize identity, you just go here and remove this line of code, and we will give you a scaffolder that allows you to scaffold all the code that we provide in the library into your app, so that you have full control of what you want to do there.
Okay. Very cool. And then if someone wanted to look into more detail, they could look at the source code on the repo.
Yeah, what repo is this in for?
Identity.
This is in the identity repo in the identity default UI project, or the?
Yeah, so we can go there.
Wow. He knew this question would be asked, and he was ready.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is the project this is all that it takes to make identity UI. So areas identity is just the content, and it's your typical Razor pages, models, and all those things. We have a www root folder here with our CSS or JavaScript and everything else that we need.
And so that answers another question I think that's coming in. Fanny's asking more about details on serving up JavaScript, CSS front end. So
Yeah.
this would be an example where people could look at how you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not as nice as doing Razor pages, but at least you don't run into any technical limitation with serving embedded files or anything like that. It's just a bit harder to plug in, or you need to be more careful when you plug it in. But yeah, everything else that we have here is a bunch of extensions and sugar and all that stuff. And if this is the CS prog, the only thing that we do for our manifest is just to say this line of MSBuild, generate embedded files manifest. And what that does is when you are embedding all the files in your assembly, we generate an XML manifest with all the original paths to those files, so that we can preserve the file structure when you were compiling the code.
Can you scroll down like 1 or 2 more lines? I think some more stuff people want to see is cut off. Right there.
Yeah.
So see, we're including as in the embedded resource item group the files under dub root, so that this sort of stuff combined with the generate embedded files will put the files in the assembly.
Yep.
So if they ship in your assembly, and then how do you get them out?
So you don't get them out; you consume them as embedded files.
Okay.
And in order to do that, I can show the explicit code.
We have a couple of minutes. Might as well.
Yeah. Let me go to configure options. Yeah. So here is the code. Essentially, forget about all these lines of code. These are just for initializing the file provider, options. But essentially, what happens is we have this type embedded manifest file provider, and you give it an assembly, and you can give it the folder you want to expose within that assembly. So what this line of code does essentially is grab the manifest from this assembly along with the embedded files in it, and expose the ww root folder from that manifest. So it behaves very similar to what your app would do normally. And the other final part of it is on the file options. We just set the file provider to be a composite one, and we pass in the existing one and the new one that we just created. So the idea is that you just chain these things at the end.
Yeah, and at the end it's important because that means that the app can override anything that it wants to that's coming from the package. So this is putting the embedded file provider after the app's file provider.
Yep.
Okay. So just to drill in a little more, question from Michael. He's asking about like applying custom themes to his layouts, including vendor things like, I don't know, Bootstrap or whatever. That this is kind of the pattern for how you do that.
This is the state of the art right now.
Yeah, okay. This is one of the options.
I think we'd like to make this process a little bit better. I think the stuff in the CS project is probably not going to change, but I think we'd like to try and find a way to solve this thing so that everybody doesn't have to go write this code. Mm-hmm. It's not clear when we'll do that at this point.
Cool.
So let us know if you run into problems with this approach. Let us know if you find that this is something that you end up doing a lot. Let us know too. We'd love to work with you guys to come up with better solution here. And your feedback helps us make decisions about what we work on. So let us know if this is important to you. And
awesome.
Good enough.
Okay. Did you cover all the demos then that you'd wanted to show?
I think so.
Cool. All right. I think that's most of the questions. Anything else you want to point out or show as we wrap up?
No. I would just say go try it out, and we'll have a preview hopefully soon out.
Yeah.
So just try it out and tell us what you think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. And the place for people to where's the best place for people to keep up with that? Is that on the home repo, or is that?
So home repo is probably the best place because this is not a feature that you can say is just in this repo. It's more of a set of improvements across all our stack to light up the scenario, if
Okay.
it makes sense.
All right.
We've been doing changes I've been doing changes all over the place.
Okay. Well, thanks a bunch. This is really exciting, and I can see this is something where a lot of things, like for instance, cleaning up my application by, like you showed, putting identity in its own kind of separate package so it's not scattered around a site. And then I can see a lot of other things. I can see component vendors and library authors, and ship inside of a company, shipping default UI, but making it overridable, all kinds of stuff there. So very cool. So we have one more short but very important component of the show, and I'm not sure if it's been explained to you, the dramatic zoom out.
Oh, I saw that the other day, but I don't know how to do it.
You have to learn. Get the remote.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So you zoom pretty far in. I have to lock the display to you.
Okay, let me try this.
Okay. You zoom in.
I need to zoom in first and then zoom out.
Zoom in, zoom out, and I have to be ready to say stop broadcast. Okay, you ready? Now, so you hit zoom out. Yeah, dramatic zoom out. It's so dramatic.